400 years, from 1517 until the end of World War I, the land we now call Israel and Palestine was a part of the vast Ottoman Empire. This was a Turkish empire, ruled from the grand city of Constantinople. The region itself was not a single country but was divided into several administrative districts, or sanjaks. Life for the people here was largely agricultural, tied to the seasons and the soil. Villages were scattered across the hills and coastal plains, while cities like Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Haifa were centers of trade, religion, and local government. The population was diverse, a mosaic of different faiths and ethnicities living side by side, though not always in perfect harmony. Most of the inhabitants were Arabs, who were overwhelmingly Muslim, but there was also a significant Christian Arab community and a small ancient Jewish population that had lived there for centuries. These communities coexisted under the Ottoman system. The empire organized its non-Muslim subjects into millets, or religious communities, which were allowed a degree of autonomy over their own affairs, such as marriage, divorce, and inheritance. This meant that Jewish and Christian groups could manage their internal matters according to their own traditions, as long as they paid their taxes and remained loyal to the Sultan. For the Jews, Jerusalem held a profound, almost mystical significance. It was the site of their ancient temples, the heart of their ancestral kingdom, and the focus of their prayers for nearly 2 millennia of exile. Despite their small numbers, they maintained a continuous presence, particularly in the 4 holy cities, Jerusalem, Hebron, Safed, and Tiberias, sustained by faith and charity from Jewish communities abroad. In the late 19th century, a new idea began to stir among the Jews of Europe. This idea was Zionism. It was a modern political movement born out of a reaction to the persistent and often violent anti-Semitism that plagued the continent. Thinkers like Theodor Herzl, an Austro-Hungarian journalist, argued that the only real solution to the Jewish question was for Jews to have a state of their own. He believed that assimilation into European societies had failed and that Jews would never be truly safe or accepted until they could exercise self-determination in their own land. This movement sought to transform the ancient religious yearning for Zion, a biblical name for Jerusalem and the land of Israel, into a concrete plan for a sovereign Jewish nation. Inspired by this vision, small groups of idealistic Jewish pioneers began to immigrate to Ottoman Palestine. These early waves of immigration, known as Aliyah, brought young men and women, mostly from Eastern Europe, who were determined to build a new life. They purchased land, often from absentee Arab landlords, and set about establishing agricultural settlements, or kibbutzim. They drained swamps, tilled rocky soil, and revived the Hebrew language as a modern spoken tongue. Their arrival, though small in scale at first, marked the beginning of a profound transformation. It introduced new people, new ideas, and new ambitions into a land that had, for centuries, moved to a much slower, more traditional rhythm, unknowingly setting the stage for future conflict. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 shattered the old world order and sealed the fate of the ailing Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans made the fateful decision to ally themselves with Germany and the Central Powers, placing them in direct opposition to Britain, France, and Russia. This turned the Middle East into a major theater of war. For Great Britain, the region was strategically vital. The Suez Canal in Egypt was the lifeline to its empire in India, and control of the lands bordering it was a paramount concern. British strategists saw the Ottoman Empire's weakness as an opportunity to secure their imperial interests and reshape the map of the Middle East to their advantage, a goal they pursued with a mixture of military force and cunning diplomacy. As the war raged, the British sought allies to help them defeat the Ottomans. They found a willing partner in the Arab nationalists. In a series of letters exchanged between 1915 and 1916, Sir Henry McMahon, the British High Commissioner in Egypt, corresponded with Hussein bin Ali, the Sharif of Mecca. The British encouraged Sharif Hussein to lead an Arab revolt against their common Ottoman enemy. In return, they appeared to promise him independence and sovereignty over a vast Arab state after the war. Fueled by this promise, Arab forces, famously advised by the British officer T.E. Lawrence, or Lawrence of Arabia, launched a guerrilla campaign that harassed Ottoman supply lines and played a crucial role in weakening the empire's hold on the region. While these promises were being made to the Arabs, British officials in London were engaged in another, seemingly contradictory, set of negotiations. The Zionist movement, led by charismatic figures like Chaim Weizmann, had been lobbying the British government intensely, Weizmann, a brilliant chemist, had made important contributions to the British war effort and used his influence to advocate for a Jewish national home in Palestine. The British government, for its own strategic reasons, saw value in this proposal. They believed that securing the support of Jewish communities in America and Russia could help the Allied cause, and that a pro-British entity in Palestine would help secure the eastern flank of the Suez Canal after the war. This culminated in a pivotal moment on November 2, 1917. The British Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, sent a letter to Lord Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community. This document, which became known as the Balfour Declaration, was short, but its impact was monumental. It stated that the British government viewed with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Crucially, it also included a clause that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. These two clauses, one promising a home to a people who were mostly absent, and the other promising to protect the rights of the people who were already there, contained the seeds of a future conflict that would define the region for the next century. With the Ottoman Empire defeated, the victorious Allied powers met to decide the fate of its former territories. Instead of granting immediate independence as the Arabs had hoped, they created a new system called the Mandate system. Under this arrangement, Britain and France were given control over different parts of the Middle East, with the stated goal of guiding them towards self-rule. In 1922, the League of Nations formally granted Great Britain the Mandate for Palestine. The terms of the mandate explicitly incorporated the Balfour Declaration, legally obligating Britain to facilitate the creation of a Jewish national home. This decision was celebrated by the Zionists, but met with bitter disappointment and anger by the Arabs, who felt betrayed by the British and saw the mandate as a new form of colonialism. Under British administration, Jewish immigration to Palestine, or Aliyah, began to increase significantly. The British Mandate authorities established separate institutions for the Jewish and Arab communities. The Jewish community created a robust political body called the Jewish Agency, which acted as a sort of government in waiting. It organized immigration, established schools and hospitals, managed economic development, and even formed a clandestine self-defense force, the Haganah. Jewish immigrants brought capital, skills, and a powerful drive to build the foundations of a future state. They founded new cities like Tel Aviv and transformed the landscape with their agricultural and industrial projects, creating a dynamic and rapidly modernizing society. For the Arab population, this period was one of growing alarm and resistance. They watched as their demographic majority slowly eroded and as land was sold to Jewish organizations, often by absentee landlords living in other countries. They feared that the ultimate goal of Zionism was to dispossess them and create a Jewish state in their place. This fear and resentment fueled the rise of Arab nationalism in Palestine. Resistance took many forms, from political protest and petitions to strikes and violent outbreaks. Major riots erupted in 1920, 1921, and 1929, often centered on disputes over access to religious holy sites in Jerusalem and Hebron, revealing the deepening chasm between the two communities. The British found themselves in an impossible position, trapped between their conflicting promises. They tried to manage the situation by controlling the pace of Jewish immigration through a system of quotas, hoping to appease Arab anger without completely abandoning their commitment to the Zionists. These policies satisfied no one. The Jews felt the British were betraying the spirit of the Balfour Declaration by limiting immigration, especially as persecution in Europe intensified. The Arabs felt the British were not doing nearly enough to halt what they saw as a colonial takeover of their homeland. The land became a powder keg of competing nationalisms, with both sides viewing the other with increasing suspicion and hostility, and the British struggling to keep the peace. The rise of the Nazi Party in Germany in the 1930s cast a dark and terrifying shadow over the Jews of Europe. Adolf Hitler's regime implemented increasingly brutal anti-Semitic policies, stripping Jews of their rights, their property, and their dignity. For many European Jews, Palestine was no longer just an ideological dream. It became a desperate necessity, a potential refuge from persecution and death. The demand for immigration certificates skyrocketed, but British policy, in an attempt to quell Arab unrest, had become more restrictive. In 1939, on the eve of World War II, Britain issued the White Paper, which severely limited Jewish immigration to just 75,000 people over 5 years and restricted their ability to buy land. After that, immigration would depend on Arab consent, which was, honestly, unlikely to be given. The Holocaust, the systematic, state-sponsored genocide of 6 million Jews by the Nazis and their collaborators during World War II, was a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. It decimated the ancient Jewish communities of Europe and fundamentally changed the political landscape. When the horrors of the concentration camps were revealed to the world at the end of the war, the Zionist argument for a sovereign Jewish state gained immense moral and political weight. The idea that Jews needed a place where they could be masters of their own destiny, safe from the whims of other nations, seemed, well, irrefutable. The international community was overcome with a sense of guilt and a desire to provide a solution for the hundreds of thousands of Jewish survivors languishing in displaced persons camps across Europe. In Palestine, the Jewish community responded to the British White Paper with defiance. Underground paramilitary groups, including the mainstream Haganah, and more radical factions like the Irgun and Lehi, intensified their struggle against British rule. They organized illegal immigration, smuggling Holocaust survivors past the British naval blockade in rickety ships. They also launched attacks on British military installations, infrastructure, and personnel, viewing the British as an occupying force that was preventing the rescue of their people. The most notorious of these attacks was the bombing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem in 1946 by the Irgun, which housed the British Military Command and Secretariat, killing 91 people. By 1947, Great Britain had reached its breaking point. The Mandate had become ungovernable. The country was exhausted and nearly bankrupt after World War II, and it no longer had the will or the resources to continue policing the escalating conflict in Palestine. British soldiers were being killed by Jewish militants, and the international pressure, particularly from the United States, to find a solution for the Jewish refugees, was immense. Recognizing its failure to reconcile the Arab and Jewish communities, Britain announced that it was handing the problem over to the newly formed United Nations. The British dream of shaping the Middle East had ended in a quagmire of violence and recrimination, and they prepared to withdraw, leaving the fate of Palestine to the world. In 1947, the United Nations took up the challenge of Palestine. It formed a special committee, UNSCOP, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, to investigate the situation and propose a solution. After months of hearings and travels through the region, the committee members witnessed the depth of the divide. They saw the vibrant state-like society the Jews had built and understood their desperate need for a sanctuary after the Holocaust. They also recognized the Arabs' deep attachment to the land and their right to self-determination. The majority of the UNSCOP members concluded that the competing national aspirations were irreconcilable and that a single unified state was no longer viable. They recommended partitioning Palestine into 2 separate states. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly voted on the Partition Plan, Resolution 181. The plan proposed the division of Mandate Palestine into an independent Arab state, an independent Jewish state, and a special international zone for the city of Jerusalem. The Jewish state was allocated about 56% of the land, including the fertile coastal plain and the Negev desert, even though Jews owned a smaller percentage of the land and constituted about 1/3 of the population. The resolution passed with 33 votes in favor, 13 against, and 10 abstentions. The Jewish community in Palestine and around the world erupted in joyous celebration, dancing in the streets. For them, it was the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream, an international endorsement of their right to statehood. The Arab world, however, rejected the plan outright. The Arab states and the Palestinian Arab leadership viewed it as a grave injustice. They argued that the United Nations had no right to partition their homeland and give a majority of it to a minority of immigrant settlers. They saw the plan as a continuation of Western colonialism that ignored the rights of the indigenous majority. The vote immediately triggered a wave of violence. As the British began to withdraw, the simmering tensions erupted into a full-blown civil war. Arab militias attacked Jewish settlements and transportation, while Jewish forces retaliated, and both sides fought for control of strategic positions across the country. As the last British troops prepared to depart, the Jewish leadership, led by David Ben-Gurion, faced a momentous decision. On May 14, 1948, the day the British Mandate officially expired, Ben-Gurion stood before a crowd in the Tel Aviv Museum and declared the establishment of the State of Israel. He proclaimed, "We hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel to be known as the State of Israel." The declaration promised social and political equality to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. But there was no time for celebration. The very next day, the armies of 5 neighboring Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded the newborn state, determined to destroy it. This marked the beginning of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, a conflict that would determine Israel's survival and shape the destiny of the entire region. The creation of the State of Israel was not a single event, but the culmination of decades of history, driven by powerful forces of faith, nationalism, and global politics. It began in the waning days of a multi-ethnic Ottoman Empire, where a diverse population lived under a system that was slowly giving way to new ideas. The rise of Zionism in Europe provided a powerful political answer to the ancient Jewish yearning for a return to its ancestral homeland, transforming a religious dream into a practical project of settlement and state building. This movement brought determined pioneers to Palestine who began to lay the foundations of a new society, often unaware of the profound impact their arrival would have on the existing Arab population. The First World War acted as a great catalyst, shattering the Ottoman Empire and bringing British power into the heart of the Middle East. In their effort to win the war, the British made competing promises to both Arabs and Jews. The Balfour Declaration gave the Zionist movement an invaluable charter of international legitimacy, while promises made to Sharif Hussein fueled Arab hopes for a great independent kingdom. The British Mandate that followed was an attempt to manage these contradictory commitments, but it ultimately failed. It created a pressure cooker environment where 2 national movements, each believing the land was rightfully theirs, grew in strength and clashed with increasing violence, with the British caught in the middle. The unparalleled horror of the Holocaust created an urgent and undeniable moral imperative for a Jewish homeland. The world, shocked into action, looked for a way to solve the plight of the Jewish survivors, giving the final push for statehood. When Britain relinquished its mandate, the United Nations stepped in with its partition plan, an attempt at a logical but ultimately unworkable compromise. The plan's acceptance by the Jews and its rejection by the Arabs set the stage for the final, violent act of Israel's creation. The Declaration of Independence in 1948 was a moment of triumph for the Jewish people, but it was also the beginning of a war for survival that would have lasting consequences. Thus, the State of Israel was born from a complex tapestry of ancient history, modern nationalism, imperial ambition, and global catastrophe. Its emergence was a story of incredible perseverance and state-building on the part of the Jewish people. However, it was also a story that led to the displacement of a majority of the Palestinian Arab population, an event they call the Nakba, or catastrophe. The conflict that erupted in 1948 was not the end of the story but the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by a struggle for land, security, and identity that continues to this day. The historical journey that led to Israel's creation left a dual legacy of national fulfillment and national dispossession, the echoes of which still resonate powerfully in the world we live in.